Hello everyone, Adam here, and today I will be talking about two of the biggest superhero games to release this generation, Batman Arkham Knight and Marvel's Spider-Man, and compare and contrast to see which title is the better superhero game. And yes, this video will contain spoilers for games that are over a year old, so let this serve as your first, final, and only warning. And as always, leave a like, share, and subscribe because my views are dropping ever since the whole situation with YouTube and Kappa. And to further cover myself, this video is not intended for anyone under the age of 13, as well as my content on AMHarbinger. So let's get on to the video. Batman Arkham Knight is the final game in the core trilogy made by Rocksteady Studios, having Batman attempt to rescue the city of Gotham from Scarecrow and his new fear toxin, while also battling a new enemy called the Arkham Knight who leads an armed militia. On top of that, Joker's infected blood that runs through Batman's body is now causing hallucinations of the Joker and will eventually turn him into the Clown Prince of Crime, similar to others infected with the blood. The narrative is varied, with Batman taking on more dangerous missions, mostly due to his hubris. When I first played through Arkham Knight, I was floored with how far they took the psychological battles with Joker, but underwhelmed with the execution of the Arkham Knight. And when replaying this game for this video, I had the same opinions. Would Batman constantly have to push through another limitation to maintain his control over his body, while also submitting to constant exposure to the fear toxin that accelerated the process of becoming Joker? But there were many issues during this journey. The most predominant was the execution of the Arkham Knight. This deadly and opposing figure proves to be Batman's equal in combat and strategy, had little appeal due to Bruce being unaware of his identity being one of the major factors within the narrative. Many fans were able to predict the Knight's identity very easily as Jason Todd, and even if you didn't know this from the beginning, the developers went as far as to showcase Jason being tortured and supposedly killed by the Joker, and the Arkham Knight later showing that he knows who Batman is. I mean, it doesn't get more obvious than that. It was also shameful to see that Batman didn't figure it out. Yes, one can argue that Batman accepted Jason's death, or he didn't want to believe that it was him, but Batman is the world's greatest detective, someone who places logic and justice above everything else. Heck, one of the more popular and notorious things about Batman is his preparation for everything and incredible analytical mind, such as his contingency plans against the Justice League, people he considers friends and family. I know that's from a different universe, but Batman shares a common edifice among his various interpretations, so it's extremely unlikely that Batman would not make the connections of who the Arkham Knight is. And even if Batman was so overwhelmed with the Joker infection and Scarecrow, most players were just waiting for Jason to show himself, devaluing the eventual reunion between Bruce and Jason. Moving on to Marvel's Spider-Man, the narrative has an established Spider-Man taking down the Kingpin in the beginning and triggering a new set of events where new criminals rise due to the Kingpin's absence, where his father figure and hero Dr. Octavius would end up going down a dark path and unleash a chemical super weapon onto New York to take revenge against Norman Osborn, while also facing off against notorious villains and ordinary criminals as he attempts to save New York City and even Otto. Much of the adventure has Peter making choices within his personal life as Peter Parker and his superhero life as Spider-Man. The people Peter has profound relationships with end up making critical choices that alter his own life as well, whether it's accepting that Mary Jane will take on more life-threatening assignments despite his concerns, or Dr. Otto slowly becoming more vengeful. These executions are much better done due to Peter's personality. Most players knew that Dr. Otto was going to don the mechanical arms and become a threat, but this wasn't known to Peter. What Peter saw was his father figure and mentor, someone who inspired and showed him that he could make a difference as Peter Parker, but then becoming something he fights against, with his entire respect for Otto coming crashing down when Peter realizes that the man he once knew is gone. If you look through the lab each time you revisit the lab as part of the story progression, you can see that the transformation happening before Peter's eyes, but he completely ignores this because he trusted Otto. I'm sure someone will argue that Peter's relationship with Martin Lee would say otherwise, but I would argue against this as well. Peter is faced directly with Lee's demonic actions when inside his hidden room, unlike Otto, who was indirectly revealing this darker side to himself. Peter chooses to ignore Otto's warning signs, but couldn't ignore Lee's. You can state that this is similar to Batman's ignorance of seeing the Arkham Knight as Jason Todd, similar to Peter ignoring Otto, but I would argue against this as well. Batman is someone who always takes logic and evidence above everything else, even if it means going against those he cares about. Peter isn't the same. He often overlooks things, and it's been established in the DLC, The City That Never Sleeps, that Peter is very easy to trick, with the Black Cat tricking Peter about her false kidnapped child, or her father tricking Peter to collect stolen art. The guy is not good at judging people's motives, and it works for supporting how Peter was blind about Otto's slow transformation. He didn't see it coming because he's easily tricked, despite being a scientific genius. During one of the final missions, Peter finds himself having to construct an antidote against Scorpion's poison. That's when Peter sees Otto has been turning right before his eyes. That's why the final battle between the two is more emotionally tense than when Batman confronts Jason Todd without his mask. We knew that Jason was behind the mask the entire time, and it meant very little when Batman learned about it because he should have seen it from the beginning. Whereas in Marvel's Spider-Man, Peter ignores those warning signs because that's in his character. We knew Otto was going to go full villain, but Peter did not. But that was one of many parts. One can argue that the Joker was the actual villain of Arkham Knight. He attempted to take control of Batman's body, and it was Scarecrow's toxin that made this adventure more taxing on Batman, fighting another war within himself. Right until the end, the developers played with the player that Joker was going to take full control until Batman comes out on top, using Joker's own fears against him and retaking control, locking Joker into the deepest parts of his mind. Of course, Marvel's Spider-Man has a Battle of Wills moment when Peter must decide whether to save Aunt May, a character that played a major role throughout the game as Peter's rock and emotional support. It's hard to weigh down both of these moments since personally they were both emotionally charged situations, but what really gives Marvel's Spider-Man a leg up from Arkham Knight is the ending. Once you obtain 100% completion, Batman activates the Nightfall Protocol, ending with Batman walking into Wayne Manor and it exploding, leaving many to assume that Batman died. But the after credits show that Batman still lives. This ending would have made sense after leaks that a sequel to this game was cancelled, where Batman's son, Damian Wayne, would have taken up the role of Batman, and the game would utilize the Nemesis system found in Monolith's Middle-earth series. There were still rumors that a new Batman Arkham game is in development, but these are rumors, and it kind of makes that ending a lot more frustrating considering that this was supposed to be the finale for the trilogy. And it does seem a bit unfair because Marvel's Spider-Man was hinted to be a series from the beginning. Many expected Arkham Knight to have a solid finale, but of course that is very hard to do and the execution by Rocksteady was extremely poor. Marvel's Spider-Man offered a little better in the form of teasing the future of this series, with the symbiote being shown as a creation of Norman to cure his son Harry, hinting that Venom will be the next villain. It's not just the promise of a new game that made Marvel's Spider-Man ending better than Arkham Knight, it was the execution. Seeing Batman return suddenly and then disappear rose more questions and excitement. If there was going to be a new game, is this a new trilogy? What is this? Whereas Marvel's Spider-Man provided a more excitement because most fans knew another game was going to come. And leaving the player more excited for the future of this series instead of confused is always better. And that lasting impression left by Marvel's Spider-Man was definitely better than the one left by Arkham Knight in the story category.
I mean, I've fought specters, but, you know, technically specters aren't ghosts. All ghosts are specters.
Both Insomniac and Rocksteady played to the strengths of Spider-Man and Batman. Spider-Man's movement does outshine Batman due to his level of versatility and control. Those familiar with the Batman Arkham games will know that jumping down or leaping across ledges was problematic, especially when no grapple hook icon was present. Spider-Man fixes many of these problems by providing a simple command that allows Spider-Man to jump across large gaps, whether small or big, by simply pressing down the triggers. Unfortunately, Batman doesn't have a similar ability to better position himself in and out of combat other than the grapple, and that can be tricky to use when targeting a specific ledge. As stated, Batman does have his gadgets to combat these limitations, and Batman uses these gadgets in combat to counter various enemy tactics with a specific item, whereas Spider-Man can simply rely on his speed and weapon to take down any foe, with Spider-Man's gadgets serving more like an optional combat advantage, but also creates less challenge. Unless heavily outnumbered, the combat encounters for Spider-Man are one-sided. Spider-Man can easily dodge, counterattack, and defeat any opponent with basic strikes. You are encouraged to maintain a high combo meter and be aware of your surroundings to properly counter oncoming fire, but compared to Batman's combat challenges, it's a walk in the park. Arkham Knight builds on the same system of the past Arkham games, Arkham Asylum and Arkham City, because it works, and unlike Marvel's Spider-Man, the situations Batman finds himself in are much more difficult, with the enemies using various tactics such as throwing objects, using weapons, and healing others, to just name a few. Yes, Spider-Man's opponents do have specific weaknesses, but simply webbing them up usually solves the problem. With Arkham Knight, Batman must use a specific attack or gadget to sometimes disarm or take down the enemy. This constant rock, paper, scissors systems kept me alert during the combat, as opposed to Marvel's Spider-Man, where I could just activate an ultimate ability during sticky situations to increase my strength or just web everyone up in the area. Both games offer stealth sequences, but really, Batman Arkham Knight has this category 1. The stealth sequences in Spider-Man are painfully easy. Just distract, web, and take out the target. And once you realize how easy it is to sneak past enemies, you can chain together zipline charges to take down most enemies in a given area. You can't do this in Batman Arkham Knight. Batman is constantly outnumbered during stealth sequences and has to use everything to his advantage, whether it's high vantage points, hacking devices, or using the floor gates. Enemies will respond to fallen allies, checking areas Batman could be hiding more frequently, protecting one another, using devices to limit Batman's movements, and killing Batman within seconds if found. You have to put in a lot of thought when taking these sequences into consideration and executing your plan, and compared to Marvel's Spider-Man, Batman Arkham Knight's stealth sequences are far superior. Both Marvel's Spider-Man and Batman Arkham Knight offer incredible detailed worlds that the player can explore. Each one is well designed, with Insomniac Games creating a near replica of New York City, and the developers at Rocksteady bringing Gotham City to life. Spider-Man does have Arkham Knight beat in how you explore though. This is due to Spider-Man's incredible control, able to dart between buildings, and his wall-running abilities and web-swinging talents make exploring the city just a joy. Most players enjoy just swinging around the city as Spider-Man because it felt so right and easy. This is not to say that driving the Batmobile and gliding through this air of Gotham isn't grand, but the overuse of the Batmobile made the iconic vehicle more like something players had to babysit. Not to mention, the Batmobile's drifting feature was annoying. I mean, did Lucius coat the wheels with oil or something? Gliding was also wonderful for a short period. This becomes a repetitive motion of having to maintain altitude. After all, Batman is human, and his gliding abilities are dictated through maintaining height and velocity, whereas Spider-Man doesn't need to take any of that in consideration. You just hit a button and swing through the air with ease. And plus, the animations that Spider-Man goes through when swinging through the air, doing tricks, going through tight spaces, it's just wonderful, and it has Batman Arkham Knight's travel system beat. But despite all of this, Batman Arkham Knight has much more varied and challenging experiences that go above than what is offered in Marvel's Spider-Man. Yes, swinging through the city of New York was far better than traveling through the streets of Gotham, but that only goes so far, as gamers want something that's challenging and showcases why these heroes are so incredible. And with Spider-Man, there really is a challenge, whereas in Batman Arkham Knight, these challenging encounters happen almost every other mission. Most of your time during both of these games will be spent through side content, and Batman Arkham Knight is the clear winner here. Throughout the adventure, you'll have several different types of missions to partake in, such as analyzing the bodies left behind by a serial killer, attempt to cure a man-bat creature, and solve dozens of Riddler's challenges, to name a few. The content is much more varied than Marvel's Spider-Man. With the exception of one side mission in Marvel's Spider-Man, most of the missions have you partaking in busy work, collecting items, waves of enemies inside a specific criminal hideout, and helping civilians in bland missions. Many have stated that Spider-Man becomes an errand boy, and they're not wrong. If it wasn't for the impressive movement system, these side missions would have been much more tedious. Now, this category is very large. I decided to include visuals, voice acting, soundtrack, and atmosphere to finally establish which game is better, and also stability. For the most part, both Marvel's Spider-Man and Batman Arkham Knight excel at visuals and voice acting. Kevin Conroy is still terrific as Batman, and Mark Hamill sells it as the Joker. Yuri Lowenthal also does a fantastic job as Spider-Man, with Insomniac Games going as far as to record 2 sets of lines, one when Spider-Man is swinging and just walking around the environment. The soundtrack for both of these games are incredible, each one capturing the atmosphere of what's going on screen. Whether it's Spider-Man fighting against one of his most iconic villains, or Batman about to sacrifice himself for the greater good. However, I am going to lean towards Batman Arkham Knight. It is a personal preference because of how memorable the soundtrack was, especially the main menu theme. The visuals are a bit harder to compare. On one hand, Marvel's Spider-Man provides amazing visuals, with each of Spider-Man's various suits detailed and completely featured within the game's cutscenes. And as someone who does live close to New York City and goes into the city frequently, I can say that the city has been intricately detailed. The character models share the same high quality, with each model highlighting Insomniac's dedication yet admiration for the characters, remaining loyal to the core designs but adding their own creative touches to them. Batman Arkham Knight shares similar incredible visuals, weather effects such as when Scarecrow's gas covers the streets of Gotham, or when Ivy's plants release the life-saving spores. There is an argument to be made with the facial animations and hair of the characters being poor in Batman Arkham Knight, which look a bit off on consoles, but unlike Marvel's Spider-Man, which was built specifically for the PlayStation 4, Batman Arkham Knight has 3 different platforms, and it had to run effectively in each of the platforms. And one can make the argument that the PC version of Batman Arkham Knight looks far superior than Marvel's Spider-Man on the PS4, but then the PS4 version of Batman Arkham Knight doesn't look as good as Marvel's Spider-Man, so it's very difficult to put that into a win-lose category. But the PC version for Batman Arkham Knight launched to a whole array of problems. Unlike Marvel's Spider-Man, which was near perfect upon release, as far as I know, it didn't have any major issues, sound problems, or any technical issues. But the PC version of Batman Arkham Knight was Fallout 76 levels of broken. Unfortunately, I don't have footage for the original PC version of Batman Arkham Knight because I purchased it on the Xbox One, but there are many videos out there and articles elaborating on it. It was a disaster, and WB suspended sales of the game because it was so bad, offering refunds to anyone. They tried to later patch the game that year, but it was still problematic. They offered everyone who had the PC version of Batman Arkham Knight all the DLC, excluding console exclusives. However, most people chose to refund the game, which is prudent. Considering that this was a AAA game, it should have released in perfect state. And yes, the console versions of Batman Arkham Knight were released in stable states, but seeing that this game was multi-platform, someone who got it on PC could have had a terrible experience, and that's just not fair. I'm going to have to give the winner to Marvel's Spider-Man here because it was stable upon release, and, well, the PC version for Batman Arkham Knight wasn't. So it's very difficult to lead one side or the other, but I'm going to have to give it to Marvel's Spider-Man. Batman Arkham Knight excels at delivering a diverse and challenging adventure. The multitude of optional content combined with the core missions provide more variety than Insomniac's Marvel's Spider-Man, but the narrative of Marvel's Spider-Man creates a more dynamic story, complemented Peter's personality and leading up to an eventful conclusion and cliffhanger for the next game, highlighting Peter's innocence and naive nature, whereas Batman's skill is often lowered for the sake of Arkham Knight's narrative. Each game had its own strengths and weaknesses, such as Spider-Man's movement system and Batman's incredible soundtrack, but there has to be a victor, and this choice isn't going to be easy. It's probably going to anger a lot of people. I'm going to have to give this victory to Marvel's Spider-Man. The game simply generated more excitement for the future of this series, whereas Rocksteady's Batman Arkham Knight really just generated more confusion than anything else, not to mention that the poor execution of the Arkham Knight really dragged down most of the experience. So that's the video. I would love to hear what you have to say on this topic. Did you like Batman Arkham Knight or Marvel Spider-Man more? Or did you dislike both games? Tell me in the comments below, and I'll see you all next time. Stay awesome, everyone.
As elevator shafts go, this is pretty nice.